Was pulling on my jacket when my phone lit up with a call from my accountant. Not a text, a call. Kevin never calls. He emails me spreadsheets with color-coded tabs and leaves voicemails only when the IRS is involved. So when his name appeared on my screen at 9:47 on a Saturday morning, my stomach dropped before I even answered. "Don't go to that meeting," he said. "No hello, no how are you. Just that." Kevin, I'm literally walking out the door. I know, that's why I'm calling. Listen to me, do not go to that building today. I stood in my hallway with one boot on and one boot in my hand. My brother had texted me the address 2 days ago. A conference room at a title company in Scottsdale. He said it was just a formality. A few signatures, he said. Wrapping up the last piece of Dad's estate. He said it would take 20 minutes. Kevin had been managing my family's finances since before my father got sick. He knew every account, every asset, every outstanding debt. He was the one who helped me understand the estate paperwork after Dad passed 18 months ago. He was methodical and careful and not the kind of man who panicked. "Tell me what's happening," I said. "I got a call last night from the title company," he said. "From one of the processors there. She noticed something on the documents your brother submitted and she wanted to flag it before the signing." I set my boot down on the floor. "What kind of something?" "The deed transfer," he said. "The property on Camelback Road. The one your father left equally to both of you. Your brother filed paperwork 3 weeks ago showing that you already signed over your half to him. A quitclaim deed. Notarized." I heard the words. I understood them individually, but together they didn't make any sense. "I never signed anything," I said. "I know," Kevin said. "That's why I'm calling." My father built that property from nothing. He bought the land in 1991 when Scottsdale was still half desert and half possibility, and he spent the next decade turning a 2-acre lot into a commercial rental space with 4 units that generated real, consistent income. He used to take me there on Sundays when I was little, walking the perimeter with me like he was showing me something sacred. "This is how you build something that lasts," he would say. "Not fast, not flashy. Brick by brick." When he was diagnosed with ALS 3 years ago, he updated his will immediately. He was precise about it in the way he was precise about everything. The Camelback property would be split equally between me and my brother. Everything else, his retirement accounts, his personal belongings, the smaller savings, divided fairly. He had a real estate attorney handle the trust documents. He wanted it airtight. My brother is 7 years older than me. We were never particularly close growing up, but we were civil. He married young, moved to Tempe, had 2 kids, built a life. I went to college and stayed, got a degree in accounting, which is probably why Kevin and I found each other, and eventually started working for a nonprofit that manages housing assistance programs for low-income families in the Valley. I don't make a lot of money. I've never made a lot of money, but I have always been careful with what I have. The Camelback property represented something real for my future. The rental income from my half would cover my mortgage. It would give me stability I'd spent my whole adult life working toward. My father knew that. He designed his estate with exactly that in mind. After Dad passed, I let my brother handle most of the estate administration because he said he had time, and I was grieving and working and barely keeping myself upright. He checked in regularly. He sent updates. He told me the process was moving along. I trusted him the way you trust family, not because you verified anything, but because you assume the foundation is solid. That was my mistake. Kevin told me to come to his office instead of the title company. He had already pulled everything he could find by the time I got there. The quitclaim deed was real, or rather, it was a real document with a fake signature. Someone had signed my name, had it notarized by a notary in Chandler whose license had lapsed 8 months earlier, and filed it with the county recorder's office 6 weeks ago. The date on the document placed the signing 2 days after my father's funeral. I was home that week. I barely left my couch. Kevin spread the papers across his desk and pointed at the signature line. "That's not your handwriting," he said. He was right. I have cramped, left-leaning cursive from years of writing fast in small notebooks. The signature on that document was lubing and confident and completely unfamiliar. It didn't look anything like mine. "Who benefits from this?" I asked, even though I already knew. Kevin looked at me steadily. If this deed is accepted as valid, your brother owns the property outright. He listed it for sale last month. There's a pending offer for $1.4 million. $1.4 million. My half would have been $700,000. I drove home in a kind of fog. I kept replaying the past 18 months in my head, looking for moments I had missed, signals I had dismissed. And I started finding them. My brother had always been the one to email me estate updates. He told me when accounts were distributed, when paperwork was filed, when deadlines passed. I never saw the original documents. He summarized them for me in casual emails and I accepted the summaries. When I asked once about the property timeline, he told me the county recorder's office was backlogged and it was gonna take longer than expected. I didn't follow up. Why would I? He was my brother. I thought about the time he came to visit me 3 months after the funeral, under the guise of going through Dad's personal belongings. He asked to use my home office to make some phone calls. He said he needed quiet. I made coffee and left him alone for almost 2 hours. My home office is where I keep my files, including the folder with my notarized ID documents, my signature cards, and copies of legal paperwork from the estate. I had pulled those out when Dad first got sick and I had never moved them. I sat in my car in my driveway and felt something cold settle in my chest. I called an attorney that afternoon. Her name is Susan Ellerman, and she specializes in real estate fraud and probate litigation. Kevin had used her before and trusted her completely. She picked up on the second ring, listened to everything I said without interrupting, and then asked me a single question. Do you have any documentation of your involvement in the estate process? Emails, texts, anything with dates? I had everything. I am my father's daughter. I keep records. She told me not to contact my brother. Not yet. She told me to gather every email he had ever sent me about the estate, every text, every voicemail. She wanted to see the timeline he had constructed versus the one the documents showed. She also told me to contact the county recorder's office myself and formally dispute the deed before the sale could close. How long do I have? I asked. The pending sale gives us a window, she said, but we need to move fast. Over the next 10 days, I did not sleep well. I worked during the day and spent my evenings building a file. I had 2 years of email chains. I had texts where my brother referenced the property, the estate, the timeline. I had a voicemail from him dated 6 weeks ago, telling me the property paperwork was almost done and I shouldn't worry about it. That voicemail, 6 weeks ago, which was right when he filed the fraudulent deed. Susan flagged that immediately. He was managing your perception of the timeline, she said, making sure you thought everything was in progress so you wouldn't go looking yourself. She also found something else. The notary, whose stamp appeared on the quitclaim deed, the one with the lapsed license, had also notarized 2 other documents in my brother's name in the past year. Both were financial in nature. Both were filed with state agencies that don't cross-reference notary license status in real time. It wasn't a coincidence. He found someone willing to notarize documents without being too careful, Susan said. This was planned. I asked her how long she thought he had been planning it. She paused for a moment. Based on what you've told me about the estate administration, I think he started the day your father updated his will. There's a grief that comes from betrayal that is different from any other kind. When my father died, I cried for weeks. I missed him in a way that was physical, like a bruise that pressed on my sternum every morning. That grief was clean somehow. Terrible, but honest. What I felt finding out about my brother was different. It was a disorientation more than a sadness. I kept looking at ordinary memories and asking myself what was real inside them. When he hugged me at the funeral, was he already calculating? When he called to check on me in those first awful months, was it concern or was it surveillance? When he asked to use my office, did he already know what he was going to take? I don't have an answer to those questions. I don't think I ever will. What I do know is that I stopped trying to protect his reputation about 2 weeks into this process. My sister-in-law called me early one morning before Susan had filed anything, trying to feel out how much I knew. She was careful about it. She asked how I was doing, mentioned that my brother was stressed about the estate taking so long, suggested maybe we should all just get together soon and clear the air. I was polite. I told her I was fine. I told her I hoped to see them soon. The next day, I handed Susan every piece of documentation I had. The county recorder's office processed the dispute within 8 days. Because the notary's license had lapsed before the document was signed, the deed was invalid on its face. The title company put the sale on hold. The buyer's agent called my brother to tell him the closing could not proceed. I was not there for that conversation, but Susan told me later that his attorney reached out within the hour, floating the idea of a family settlement to resolve the matter quietly. I told Susan to tell them no. This was not a misunderstanding. It was not a clerical error. Someone forged my signature on a legal document 2 days after I buried my father. Whatever my brother thought he was going to get by handling this quietly, he had forfeited that possibility the moment he chose to steal from me instead of talk to me. The Maricopa County Attorney's Office opened a criminal investigation. Forgery and fraud charges were filed against my brother. The notary, whose identity Susan's investigator tracked down, was also charged. She was a distant acquaintance of my brother's wife who had been providing informal notary services out of her home for years. She lost what remained of her commission and faced a separate civil complaint. My brother's attorney tried twice more to reach a settlement. The second time, they offered to let me buy out his half of the property at a reduced rate, as though he still had a half to sell, as though the entire situation had simply been a negotiation tactic rather than a crime. I did not respond to that offer. The part that still sits with me, even now, is how close I came to walking into that conference room. I had gotten up early that Saturday. I had showered and made coffee and laid my jacket across the back of the chair the night before. I had even driven past the title company a few days earlier to make sure I knew where the parking was. I was going to walk in, sit down, and sign whatever he put in front of me because he was my brother and I trusted him and my father had just died and I was tired. Kevin's call came 11 minutes before I would have walked out the door. If I had signed those documents, even under fraudulent circumstances, it would have complicated everything significantly. Susan told me that unwinding a fraudulent transfer is dramatically harder once a signature, even a coerced one, exists on the page. My brother knew that. The meeting was designed to add my real signature to a transaction he had already constructed around a fake one. To bury the fraud under a layer of apparent consent. That is the level of thought that went into this. That is what he was willing to do. I think about my father walking me around that property when I was 8 years old, pointing out which units he had renovated, which ones still needed work, telling me in his patient and deliberate way what he was building and why. He was building something that would outlast him. He spent his whole life making sure his children would be okay. I don't believe my brother planned this before Dad got sick. I think watching the property appreciate in value while my father's health declined turned something in him that couldn't be turned back. Greed has a way of rewriting history in the mind of the person who has given into it. By the time he was filing fraudulent paperwork, I suspect he had convinced himself he deserved it, that he had done more, that I needed less, that the ends justified the machinery he had put into motion. He was wrong on every count. The property is still mine, half of it as my father intended. My brother's fraud charges are working through the court system. His attorney has been negotiating on his behalf, and Susan tells me the likely outcome includes probation, restitution, and a civil judgment that will follow him for years. He will not go to prison, in all probability, though that outcome is not entirely off the table. The civil case is separate and moving on its own timeline. My sister-in-law sent me a long email 3 months after the investigation became public. It was written in the language of victimhood. They were struggling, the kids were scared. She hoped I would find it in my heart to consider what this was doing to the family. She did not apologize. She did not acknowledge that any of this could have been prevented by a simple decision not to commit fraud. I read the email once and did not respond. My niece and nephew are not responsible for what their parents did. I carry that with me. When they are older and can understand what happened, I hope to have a relationship with them that is honest and separate from their parents' choices. They deserve that. So do I. I have a property manager now handling both units on my half of the Camelback building. The first month's rental income hit my account in March. I stood in my kitchen and looked at the deposit notification for a long time. I thought about my father. I thought about Sunday mornings and that patch of desert he turned into something real. Brick by brick, he used to say. He was right about that. He was right about most things. I don't know if my brother will ever understand what he destroyed. Not just the trust between us, not just whatever was left of our family, but the version of himself that could have been the person our father believed he was. That version is gone. He chose to let it go the day he decided that what I had was worth more than who he could be. I didn't get justice because I was smarter or stronger or braver. I got justice because Kevin called when he did, because Susan knew what to look for, because my father taught me to keep records, and because one woman at a title company on a Friday afternoon noticed that something didn't look right and decided it was worth a phone call. Sometimes the thing that saves everything is just someone doing their job carefully. I try to remember that when my own work feels small. When the housing applications stack up on my desk and the funding cycles get complicated and I wonder if what I do matters in any measurable way, I try to remember that a careful person on an ordinary afternoon can be the difference between someone's life falling apart or holding together. My father built something that lasts. I intend to do the same. I keep coming back to the 11 minutes. Kevin called 11 minutes before I would have walked out that door. I had my keys in my hand, I had checked the parking situation. I was ready. And if his call had come 12 minutes later, or if he had sent an email instead, or if he had decided it could wait until Monday, I would have sat down in that conference room and signed my name next to a forgery. And the rest of my life would look completely different right now. That's not lost on me. It sits with me every single day. What I've come to understand, though, is that the 11 minutes didn't come from nowhere. Kevin called because he had spent years being the kind of person who pays attention. The woman at the title company flagged the paperwork because she had spent years being the kind of person who doesn't cut corners. Susan knew exactly what to look for because she had spent years building the expertise to recognize what most people would miss. And I had records to hand her because my father spent years teaching me that careful people outlast careless ones. None of that was luck. All of it was character, accumulated over time, showing up exactly when it needed to. My brother made a different set of choices. I don't think he woke up one day and decided to become someone who forges legal documents. I think it happened gradually, the way those things usually do. One small rationalization at a time. One corner cut. One boundary cross that he told himself didn't really count. By the time he was filing fraudulent paperwork with the county recorder's office, I think he had genuinely convinced himself he deserved what he was taking. That is what happens when you let yourself believe the rules don't apply to you. You don't just lose your integrity, you lose your ability to see that it's gone. I think about that when I'm tempted to take shortcuts in my own life, the small ones, the ones that feel harmless. Because I've watched what happens when a person builds their choices on a foundation of what they can get away with, rather than what is actually right. It doesn't hold. It never holds. And when it collapses, it takes everything with it. Not just the thing they were trying to protect, but the relationships, the reputation, the version of themselves that other people believed in. What carried me through this wasn't anger, though I had plenty of it. It was the discipline to keep going when I was exhausted and grieving and wanted to pretend none of it was happening. It was the clarity to understand what was real and what my brother needed me to believe was real. And it was the willingness to fight for something my father built with his own hands. Not because I needed to win, but because walking away would have meant agreeing that what he did was acceptable. It wasn't. It isn't. My father used to say that the way you do anything is the way you do everything. I didn't fully understand that when I was young. I understand it now. The rental income hits my account every month and I think about him every time. Not because of the money, because of what it represents. A man who did things the right way, over decades, quietly, without shortcuts, and left something real behind. That's the inheritance that actually matters, and that one, nobody can forge.